people behind the National Forest Gardening Scheme that we're onto something, and that we can contribute to what in this country we're trying to do, and many other places, of course, to heal our ecosystems and to become a bit more resilient around our food. This evening's seminar is principally about how to start your own community initiative. And we have two pioneers with us, Richard and Antony, who will introduce themselves in a moment, who've been working in Marsten and Oxford. And they believe they've got a national first, working on an allotment, in an allotment setting, and creating a community forest garden there. Now, as is inevitable when you say people are pioneers, there may well be people here tonight who've already done exactly that, but we'll hear from you a little later. They're here to tell their story. We are going to record this evening's session, so if you wouldn't want to be part of that recording, and we're doing that obviously for people who couldn't make it tonight, but if you don't want to be part of that, just use the video button and the audio button at the bottom of your screen to take yourself out. So I think without further ado, let me just check with my co-host Hannah, who's been the brains behind organising all these seminars. Hannah, shall we talk through the agenda? Would you like to do that? No? Okay, fine. I'm happy to do it. So what we're planning to do is to go straight to the presentation with Antony and with Richard, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Obviously, things will have come up. Hannah's going to be watching the chat. So if you're familiar with that function, it's in the middle of your screen. If you're familiar at the bottom on the toolbar. So if you're familiar with that function, please do put anything you want to in the chat, share resources and so on. And we'll be monitoring that and using that as a way of unearthing some questions. And of course, that doesn't exclude people speaking, of course, you know, at the end of the presentations. We want to make this as much a community feel as possible. So please do take part, enjoy it. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Antony and to Richard. Thank you very much, both of you, for being with us. You need to unmute yourselves, I think.
And Hannah, are you going to put up the first slide? Great. So I'm Antony, and well, I'm labelled permaculturist and co-organizer. I like the fact that Richard's called me dreamer, but I'm quite a beginner. I am doing a permaculture diploma with Thomas Remyards, and this is my first submitted design. So, next slide, please. Hannah? Next slide. Great. Okay, so this is an overview of the allotment plots in Marsten. It's pretty big, it's 16 acres. And what we're doing is linked to Marston Community Garden, and you'll hear more about that from Richard afterwards. He's going to talk about the people side of this. I'm going to really take through the process of how we got from deciding we had the opportunity to make a forest garden on these allotments to actually having something planted. Just to give you where we are, Marston is North Oxford. We have in the next slide, we've got a few maps, Hannah. So Marston, that's the buildings to the right-hand side of Marston, and the allotments are roughly where that horrible big red key is. If you move next slide, that is where it is in the Oxford situation, and we have the next slide just to show you how that sits in the bioregion with all this water converging on Oxford where the Cherwell meets the Thames. Okay, so June last year, Richard had a group of people from his Buddhist group who expressed willingness to support making this forest garden, and we took a walk around the area with the allotment committee and looked at a couple of sites. So then we had a meeting. If we had the next slide, the next was a gathering of those who were offering to support it. I think about 5 people met for a meeting to discuss what our goals were. And this was very important for the formation of the group and starting off. I would draw your attention here in particular to the last question of section 1. What is your personal dream in connection with this place? So if we look at the next slide, this summarizes our goals. And the word food doesn't appear here. I quite like that. The only indication that this is a food growing project is the word abundance. So the aspiration here very much emphasizes the ecological value of forest gardens. And so our dream is very much about a place that we want. And what happens practically comes out of that. So what is this place? If we look at the next slide, Hannah, this is, fortunately, Google Earth photographed this site as it was, just about as it was before we started work. And you can see there's a lot of trees here. Would you call that allotments? That doesn't look like it. I would draw your attention to the label on the right-hand side, which is the east side, because this is looking north, saying drug use remains. So this is one reason why the allotment committee is very keen to have someone work on this area. Under those trees, there were a lot of people who had been meeting up to shoot up, and there were a lot of needles, etc. So that's being cleared out. And the willow in front of that, marked willow, we decided to take down almost as a symbolic act to open up that area and bring it healing. So that area now has piles of logs from the willow that was taken down. Let's move to the next slide. So this is a quick sketch of the existing vegetation. You may remember from the previous slide that there was an area with paler green for lower vegetation and darker up towards the point of the triangle. Here you can see towards the point of the triangle, it's bramble, that's big brambles, whereas you've got MDWH, that's Michaelmas daisies, and willow herb dominating further down. So if we have the next slide, Hannah.
Oh, don't shout like that.
Finally, in July, Richard and I got a scythe and cut a path through the middle of that so we could actually get into the site and look inside it. And we decided that the area with the higher brambles, that should just be left for another year, and we were going to start work on this area that was easier to cut. Next slide. Yes, so that led to dividing this into 2 phases. So phase 1 is what we're really going to talk about. Phase 2, we will start this autumn to cut into the vegetation and make plans. Next slide, Hannah. So, however, the first stab at thinking about what we might plant, this is a very rough sketch of what can we put in here. And it's been very valuable to do phase 1 with an idea of what may go into phase 2. So that's all right. We can have a fig up there. We can have a quince. We can have a mulberry. We don't have to worry about trying to fit those into phase one. Next picture. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the number of the slide. Yes, okay. So, having decided on phase one, this is Richard's placed this in over the site. You can see roughly how the drawing fits on there. If we move on one, next slide. It's not very easy to see, I'm sorry. But that is the basic design. And I don't want to dwell on the details of what trees there are, but basically this is looking north-south, so east is the right, west is the left. It gets more sunshine in the afternoon, and sorry, let's say that again. It gets more sunshine on the west side, so that's actually mostly the morning and early, the first half of the day. That's got the fruit. The right side is mostly nuts. In this process, in August last year, I was in Scotland and went to visit Graham Bell, his famous garden, and talked to him about my incipient plans for designing this. And important, what I took away was his recommendation: plan the access and the water, and then build everything else around that. So water, we have at the top of the drawing, there's a water trough that's on the mains, and we've plotted in a pond. We'll wait to see what role that can actually play with the main paths going through. And it's essential that we need side paths, but we need to think about how is all the produce going to be harvested, what access do we need. Next slide. So how do we get from the picture on the left here, which is the one I showed you where we cut the first path with a slide, to the one in the middle when we have an open site that we could start properly surveying? Okay, the people that we don't have photographs of are the payback team, the community payback people. It's just great because the allotment committee had organized to have people coming on site who've been sentenced to X number of weeks of community payback, or X number of hours. And frequently we got them on our site, so they did a lot of the cutting and a huge amount of barrowing wood chip up from a big pile of wood chip to our site. And as you can see, our job was then to cover the place with cardboard and spread the wood chip. That took from September to December. If we have the next slide. Ta-da! On one. So once we got to December, there we are. We start the the felling of the big willow, which produced a lot of brushwood, was in December and January. These are monthly work parties. So in January, the second one, fortunately, Thomas Remiars was in town because it was immediately after the Oxford Real Farming Conference, and he gave us the sensible suggestion to make a dead hedge, which you can see there. So about half the brushwood went into the dead hedge and about half went into small bundles, which are now creating barriers around the bushes in particular. I had the pleasure of getting a visit from a Zimbabwean doctor who is on the allotment committee, who said, I love looking at your site because that dead hedge reminds me of my village in Zimbabwe. When someone gets married, they get a new plot, the first thing they do is to make a fence around it, just like that. So I really like that connection, that we have a bit of African village in our forest garden. So that is slide. Great. Next slide, please. Then we get to planting. So February the 9th is definitely the one on the right because it was a dark, wet day, but we managed to get 6 trees planted, and that was very satisfying. So we focused on getting the bare root stuff that we'd ordered into the ground. You can see the bundles of brushwood being put around to stop people walking into them and possibly deter animals. Next slide, please. And on so we got 6 trees in on the 9th of February, on the 8th of March, the remaining 3 fruit trees, 20 fruit bushes, 20 raspberries, and on the right you see this very tall walnut tree which has gone in, 2.5 meters tall, so that's at least safe from being nibbled off by the deer. Yes, if you look to the right of that tree, you see, next slide, a pile of logs. Hannah? And these are our fungal layer, so this is very nice because Cara and Rob set to and inserted plugs into these logs. You can see the little white spots are where they've been waxed in, and the right-hand picture, L is lion's mane, S is shiitake, and I'm not quite sure what R is, but they're marked out, and they're nicely positioned in semi-shades, so come this autumn, I hope we'll start to get some fungi. Next picture. Importantly, in this design includes one of the, I think, a very early planting of forest garden in a box, which if you look on the right, oh dear, the word box has disappeared, but if you go south of the apricot, there is a rectangle or a square at an angle which says if FG inner, okay, FG inner box. On the left-hand side here is Thomas Remiaz's drawing of the content of a forest garden in a box. So we have the apple tree planted and the gooseberry, blackcurrant and red currant, and we have yet to do the herb layer. Next picture, Anna. That's a photograph of it yesterday. The apple tree there, that's actually Orleans Rainette, which is in a good pollination group for the one that's the other apple tree that's just out of the picture to your right. So that is pollination group 3, I think, and Darcy's Spice, one of my favorite apples, is pollination group 4. You can see rather a lot of the Michaelmas daisy coming up through the mulch. That's the main thing that we've got to fight down. Okay, so just trying to get where we are. So we'll stay there for a moment. We've not planted any herb layer. March the 8th was the last planting with the when the shrubs went in. We have had about a day and a half of rain since then, so I think we made a good decision not to press ahead with planting the herb layer. We also have the main part of the site, all the fruit side is mulched with cardboard and wood chip, and we need that to do its work before it's a good planting medium. Meanwhile, if we have the next slide, on the other side, the eastern side, Hannah, next slide, we had an interesting conversation with someone who works. Oh no, we'll go not back one. Hannah. Good. Interesting conversation with we have an Indonesian who works on the allotments, who is extremely knowledgeable. He spends about half the year in Kalimantan organizing local people to grow crops in the forest and use the forest. So that's not forest gardening, but he knows a great deal about it. Anyway, he said you need to behave as if you were hungry. So where it was not mulched, you'll see, so this is before and after. This is a patch where we've simply cut off the regrowth of the weeds, the perennial stuff, with a shovel, and then sown in this particular spot. I had a large box of spinach and chard seed. That's gone in there, and we've sown a patch of broad beans to compete with the returning vegetation and give us a crop. And we shall see the spinach has come up quite nicely, and so have the broad beans. And how that's going to work with managing the weeds is going to be a very interesting part of the adventure. Now, next slide. Hannah, this is the pond marked out, and it's also got Kara's dog, who's an important part of the team. But, okay, just to mention that at the point when we were deciding what to do about the herb layer, Thomas, when he came in January, shortly afterwards, offered to come and do a one-day course on designing and planting the herb layer, which was due to happen late April. Therefore, it didn't happen because of COVID. So that was another contributing factor to putting off the herb layer. But it made us think, how would we use this site to teach, and where would we do that? So I'm speaking to this when we have this potential pond site here, because in the process of thinking about where we were going to do these things, we decided to move the pond 1 meter to the east. That will give it a better balance of sun and shade through the day, and the pond will go in a spot where we think we can get a lot of different microclimates. And if we have the next slide, Hannah, please. Hannah? Great. Oh, well, this should be guess the changes, spot the difference. But
sorry, Anthony, just
what I'm looking at,
you're at time now, so just
that's all right. Well, we started late. I've got to the anyway, the pond has moved, but also that, if you look on the left-hand side, there is a square just to the right of the pond, which says willow weave structure. We've abandoned that, and instead of that, on the right-hand side, you might be able to read gathering space. It's going to be further up where it gets more sunshine. A last slide from me, I think. Simply shows, there we are. This is what the summer has. We've got some good enthusiastic volunteers who will keep the weeds down, and we will decide whether we're digging the pond and what's happening next. I'm now going to hand you over. Actually, we're having a break before I hand over to Richard.
Thanks, Anthony. I know you were under some pressure there, and I think Hannah was too. We picked up a number of questions in the chat, so perhaps we could start there. What guided the decision about what to plant? I'm just going to give them in a clutch, if that's okay, and perhaps you and Richard could tackle them both. What guided the decision about what to plant and where? My guess is that's what you and Thomas and the group decided together, but maybe you've got more to say about that. What's the source of the water? That came up in the chat, and Richard was kindly answering that, but just in case that not everybody saw the answer to that. Then there was a question about the fruit. Could you mute yourself, please? Thank you. Then there was a question really about the trees, the fruit, the big nut trees, the sweet chestnut and the walnut. You know, would they outshade everything else? And then there was a really lovely question about daisies, about the Michaelmas daisies. While someone suggested a lovely ground cover, what else could we plant that could keep them in check so the daisies didn't get everywhere, so that there was a bit of competition and a bit of variety? So I'm just emptying a sort of truckload of questions at you. See what takes your fancy, and start anywhere you like, I guess.
Just to say, I put in answers to some questions in the chat box. So the water's a drop on site, and there's quite high groundwater. And I've just explained a little bit more about the walnut tree. So have a look at those. But maybe Antony can pick up on the point about the design process.
Yes. In terms of what to plant where, well, this is my first attempt to design a forest garden. So it's actually not my first attempt to design a forest garden, because 10 years ago I had a plot where I could try things out. The choice of trees and the positioning, on the one hand, putting the nuts on the east side where it's less sunny. On the other hand, the choice of the trees, there are 2 apples. We don't want too many apples because everyone has apples all over the place. It does have quite a lot of my personal preference, but also experience of what's likely to grow in this site, this being a relatively damp site. Quite a few plums, an apricot for hope of hot summers and not too much frost at blossom time. There's a mixture of experimentation and experience. The big walnut someone asked about. Oh yes, we were asking about shade from the big trees. That's why the sweet chestnuts are at the north of the site, so they won't shade our site. The one on the western side may need to be coppiced regularly because it's liable to cast shade on other allotments otherwise. But the walnuts, which will be very large trees, are on the northeast side of the site.
Thanks, Antony. There's one question, and then we'll go to Richard. There's a question about the willow dead hedge. Is sprouting an issue? As this person is asking, they have to dispose of a pollarded goat willow, and the log pile is sprouting already. And were those logs used for the fungi?
The dead hedge has not sprouted so far, interestingly, but that would only be the uprights, the pegs that are holding it in. The logs are willow logs that have got the fungi in. we do also have, obviously, we have a few hawthorn bogs from the hawthorns that were cut down.
Great, Richard. Did you want to pick up then for the next section? I think you're going to talk about the kind of the people side and the institutional side. What does it mean? What does it take to get something like this off the ground? Is that right?
Yeah, please. So Hannah will put up the slides. I'm going to take my video off because my internet connection's a bit poor. So I'll take that off, but I'll be talking to the slides. So thanks.
Keep the microphone close to your mouth, though, won't you? Because we're losing every sort of fourth or fifth word.
Okay. So next slide. I think we've got to go through a few more. That's the one. Voila. Okay. So I'll just talk a little bit about the people side. We're building up a community of people, and just want to tell you a bit about the story. And Antony is two of the people involved of about what is about a dozen people now. A dozen people engaged quite a lot, quite regularly. And this is the wonderful work of Isabel, who's produced these labels for us. And we want to bring people into the space, and we want to tell people what we're doing. We want to explain what we're planting and what the uses of those plants are. And Isabel has created these wonderful labels that we'll be putting up on stakes. Next slide, please, Hannah. So for me, just remembering what Antony said about the planning meeting we had last year, my thing is around well-being, particularly, and bringing people into nature, and particularly engaging with nature in a learning way, and in a way in which we're producing fruit and nuts and veg in due course. And so well-being is a really strong theme for me. And I've just put up on the right-hand side the 5 ways to well-being that will be known to many of you, NHS and social services, ways that have an impact for people to connect in community, to take notice, to observe what's happening, being active and giving. This is about gift back. And finally, the 5th point, learning. And forest gardening, community forest gardening does all of these things. So our vision here is bringing people onto this land so that they can sit, forage, connect and thrive. And when I talk about well-being, it's I use it in quite a broad sense. It's well-being for people. That's the narrower, more conventional sense of well-being for the community and the wider ecosystem. Next slide, please, Hannah. So earlier this year, once we got established and done some of our mulching, and we were creating something from this overgrown area of brambles, daisies, and hawthorn. I put up this sign, and this probably encapsulates the spirit we're trying to invoke here, with some explanation of what we're doing, because obviously working allotment plots collectively is unusual. Intentionally, we're working them intentionally collectively. We're doing something that's much more perennial rather than what I think is done on certainly most of the allotments here in Marsten, many allotments, and to do something with forest gardens. So we're trying to explain, and we're trying to invite people in. We're telling them here about, come onto the land, this is when we're meeting. We're also seeking to see if we can engage people in a way by contribution to a tree. Next slide, please, Hannah. So this, Hannah, I think, just keep clicking through. We've got a delay. We've got a delay here, so I think I'll just ask Hannah to put all. So first of all, we're by a footpath, and we chose this area so that we were next to a public footpath that runs through the allotments. And that gives us an opportunity to invite people to step into the space and to tell them about it. And in doing so, what we're finding is that people will connect in ways. Some will just want to learn, others will just sit, and others will want to engage in the process of preparing and planting. And I think the what we're finding is really important to listen carefully to what everyone has to say. Many people are coming along, myself included, with really little knowledge about growing and forest gardening, but listening carefully to what people say. So I think the spirit of dialogue and openness is critical. And different people will contribute in different ways. They'll contribute at their own level and at their own pace, and being open and accepting of that. We're also seeking to distribute roles and responsibility as people's skills emerge. So the labels, for example, when we saw Isabel's beautiful handwriting, that was something that she could contribute to, and we invited her to take on that. Next clicks, Hannah, please. Let's bring up the next batch of points. So Antony's very much the lead designer, and as he said, he's doing this for his permaculture course. But we're also trying to increasingly plan together, and this is so that people get a sense of the path we're treading and can see this place grow. And they can also bring in their own ideas and own suggestions. This is part of the engaged learning process. Growing a culture of learning through conversation, explanation, and experience, and we're all learning as we go along. And by sharing our knowledge as we build this up and talking to people about what we're doing is all part of this learning culture. And that's another important aspect. And the design process really does incorporate space for people and the rest of the ecosystem. There's an area to the east side, they're further allotment plots that are so overgrown, but we're now thinking of that as our wilderness area, but we're taking over responsibility for stewarding. Like we were clearing all the rubbish left by the drug users last weekend, for example. So this is around the wider ecosystem, and we're able to do this because there's quite a lot of space here. Next points, please, Hannah. So the idea of connecting and working with others, we're in this large allotment site, so there are others, and Antony had mentioned Maddie from Indonesia, who's a practitioner as well as a university lecturer in agroforestry, and so connecting with him and others and talking about what we're doing on the allotment association. Marston Community Gardening is a wider project, and we've chosen to situate our efforts, which are not formally constituted. We're an ad hoc group, but we've chosen to situate ourselves under the canopy, under the umbrella of Marston Community Gardening. And that's intentional because we're part of a wider ecosystem, and that wider ecosystem is promoting community food, growing, food preparation. So seeing ourselves as part of a bigger ecosystem beyond the allotments in that whole neighbourhood area. And the point about reciprocity and exchange with others is recognising that we're within the allotment associations, so being attentive to our relationships with the allotment association, being able to give support and advice to them and undertaking things because that provides support back to us. And similarly with Marston Community Gardening, they are providing us support. What do we have to give back to them to make sure that there's this idea of exchange? And the point 10, growing to give back and regenerate, this relates to the fourth point in the 5 ways to well-being about gifting back. Part of this is around gifting back to the local community and working with those people that can benefit from this. And that's something that's explicit within Marston Community Gardening and is part of our intent. And we'll build that. As this place becomes more established and more visible, we'll have opportunities to expand in due course. And the final point really is around communication. A lot of our communication in terms of bringing the core people involved has been one-to-one dialogue and through friends, meeting people. But there's also the aspect of communicating through Facebook and emailing, and we're doing quite a lot to tell the story of what we're doing here. There's a communication aspect with the donor. We've raised some money from an organisation to fund some of the planting and some of the activities. So there's a bunch of sort of communication stuff. It's all the background admin we're doing. Again, it's a critical part for a whole range of reasons. A number of stakeholders.
Thank
So
you.
I'd like to finish. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Richard and Anthony. We normally, a couple of people asked at the beginning about breakouts. Normally we do give some time for breakouts, and it does create some, little spaces for conversations and sparks ideas and so on. But we're a little bit pressed for time this time because we had so much to get through. There's a lot of detail there. The other point I wanted to make was that if I said or suggested that Richard and Antony were pioneers of all community forest gardens, of course that's not the case. It's really pioneering at them in an allotment setting, and of course that might be challenged. So it's kind of to underline really the fact that that's what this organisation is really about. It's about enabling forest gardens in community spaces, in publicly accessible spaces, including schools, business parks, science parks, campuses on the universities and so on, for exactly the reasons that Richard's been talking about, underlining the mental health aspect of being able to do something in community like this. So we know that there are, there's lots of experience out there. So
when someone said I was the first to go.
So it would be great if there were questions that have been popping into your mind as you've been listening, that we can now put to Richard and to Antony. So you'll need to unmute yourself. What we'll do is as before, we'll collect 2 or 3 of them and put them in little groups and clutches, and then move on to the next group if that's okay. So if you want to ask a question, do unmute yourself.
Well, we can start with, there's one Lewis Richards has put one in the chat about, could the drug users be considered people utilising the space and also be included in the design process? But if anyone else would like to unmute themselves and contribute a couple more questions to this round.
Could the drug users also be considered as people utilising the space? Yeah, great challenge.
Someone asked me that very thing at lunchtime.
Anthony, just hold off a second. We'll collect another couple of questions and then we'll hand it back to you. Okay, sorry, someone was trying to get in there. Do go ahead. Remember to unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I wondered how the project was funded, whether you've accessed government funds or whether it's local councils, or quite often stocking these places. I know you've obviously had labour offered to you, which made a huge difference. But just how do you kickstart it financially and maintain that while it's establishing?
Thank you for that. Just say your name so that...
Sorry, Kerry.
Kerry, thank you for that. Lovely. Anybody else, or should we go to Antony? Do say.
Ursula, I was just going to ask, what makes this, the fact that it's on an allotment plot, different to other forest gardens?
Thank you. Great. Okay, so Antony, should we go to you and to Richard, of course? So you had a question about drug users, about finance and setting up, and then how is this unique? You'll need to unmute yourself, Antony.
Thought I just unmuted myself. Here I am.
Yeah.
Yes, as I said, someone asked me this question about the drug users at lunchtime, and my response was, well, we've had no contact with those drug users, but we have had a flow of people doing community payback, sentence to community payback coming through. Having met most of them because I've worked with them on site regularly on Wednesday mornings, I don't really think there's been anyone that I thought seemed like a drug addict, but it was a very valuable experience being able to work with them and talk to them about what the project was. And once these people had the explanation of what we were doing, a lot of them became really committed and really enjoyed it. Whereas until you explained what we were doing, they would be generally trying to get away with doing as little work as possible during their hours of imposed community sentence. So that's the kind of social recycling that is my response to the drug users. Any comment, Richard?
So I just put a few more things in the chat box. I think that I've just put a few more things in the chat box. No, you've answered that well, thank you. I think Graham's asked something about governance issues or people problems. So on a governance, as I said, we're an ad hoc group, an informal group that have come together through one-to-one contact and dialogue. We're quite small at the moment, and so that's quite straightforward, so no problems. We also sit under Marston Community Gardening, and this is the formal body. This is the body that is a constituted community action group, and that's where the formal governance sits. And both Antony and Rian are part of the sort of governance structure there and supporting that group. So that's how the governance is. And thus far, it's early days, things have been working very well. I think I sort of talked about this idea of the importance of dialogue, good dialogue, and building slowly. That's critical for success.
I think there were questions also about finance, about setting up, Richard, and also about what made this special, the fact that it's an allotment forest garden.
So in terms of finance, initially it was a number of individuals who said, let's take on these allotment plots. So let's put our money in. We'll take on that individual responsibility to work collectively. Then we, from the notice board, you may remember I explained that we invited people to sponsor a fruit bush or a tree. And we've had a couple of donations, but we've also had a grant of £1,000 from the National Gardening Association based upon the National Open Garden Association, that Antony's successful grant application. And then one of our core members, he's also been very generous and put in £250. So we're building up in this way, and that sort of covers our budget for the time being, and we'll expand from there. Yeah. The other point, Paul, was.
So what makes it special? The fact that it's an allotment space.
I guess I don't, as Antony said, every single any town I know in the UK, there's always waiting lists for allotments. So it's extremely rare to get a series of concurrent allotment plots. Moreover, most allotment associations, and I think the regulations are changing, most allotment associations will stipulate that they the allotment plots are worked by individuals. So we're taking them on as individuals, but working them collectively. And because we had something of an overgrown blank sheet of paper, we were able to say we will create a forest garden and work this collectively. So perhaps that's the distinctive aspect to this.
Thank you.
If I could add to that, I think in the fact that it's on allotments it doesn't make it different in any inherent way, but presents an opportunity to present forest gardens to a range of allotment holders. First of all on this site, but I think to allotment holders across Oxford. So I think there's a great educational opportunity from the context.
Just one more critical point. Kerry's just pointed out planting trees. So there were so many overgrown plots on this site, but Antony and I purposely chose the location that was very overgrown on the east side. And that meant that we felt that in that location, it was both by a public footpath, part of our aspiration to bring people onto the site, but it also meant that we felt we had a good chance, and indeed we cleared it with the allotment committee, that we could grow trees without disrupting people on adjacent sites. So that's a critical, specific aspect of this site, this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Richard. Bearing in mind that people have joined this Zoom call with varying amounts of experience, but there is obviously experience out there. Would people like to share something of their own stories about how you've got going and you know, what we might all collectively learn from? Graham, you might need to unmute yourself. Yes, great.
Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about Whistlewood Common. Quite a different situation. 10 acres of land, former cabbage field, for sale on the open market. Raised the money through a community share issue. Formed ourselves as a cooperative. Absolutely blank sheet of paper, really, because it had lain fallow for a couple of years. There was only one mature oak in rather poor condition, not particularly big, on the site. And over the past 7 years, we've planted 3,500 trees. We have 4 orchard areas, 2 forest gardens within that. We have created swales, streams, ponds. We have built a community roundhouse building with a further share issue. That's a load-bearing straw bale structure. Standing absolutely idle at the moment, sadly. We're not able to use it. It was completed last year, but haven't really had our full use of it, to say the least.
Yes. And Graham, would you share what the community has said about how it benefits them having this rather extraordinary project?
Well, the thing that I found quite curious was that, and the contrast with the Marsten site, is that ours was expressly formed with an educational role. We put that right at the top of our wants. We felt that we needed to engage the community as much as we possibly could on the big global issues and show that there were appropriate local responses possible.
Mm.
So we've done a lot of workshops, activities geared towards education, helping people understand the big issues and helping them have a good time and enjoy workshops, doing various things in the meantime.
Thank you for sharing such a lovely story.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please do pitch in with your stories too.
Hi, it's Nigel here.
Hello, Nigel.
Hi, yeah, I'm one of the founders of a community food garden in Tring in Hertfordshire. And a large chunk of that's a forest garden and the remainder are hugelculture beds, raised hugelculture beds in a community space. We also are right next to allotments. It was derelict allotment area. And we were given the space by the local council. We originally had a different space in another place given to us by the Decorum Local Food Initiative. but that space is now earmarked for social housing. So we got moved to where we are now, and we've been going there for about 4 years now. So it's a very similar story to Antony's. And I've posted a link to the history in the chat.
Super, super.
I have got a question actually, which is about how you engage the local community, because we've had some interest, but we're trying to get as many people locally involved. And we just wondered if there were any sort of tips or from Antony and Richard about that, really.
Great. Let's hold that just for one more breath while we hear if there's anyone else who'd like to share a story, and maybe that story might include engagement. But if not, then we'll go to that engagement as well, just so that people have a chance to share something that we perhaps weren't expecting. So do say if you'd like to tell us what you're up to.
Oh. We've got a forest garden project in North Manchester. It was part of Incredible Edibles. A local resident found the spot. It was covered in brambles. We were already volunteering somewhere else, and we were just about to embark on a permaculture course, and we went to see it, and I said, don't take anything else on because we've got loads on. Elderly parents, and we saw the light shine into it, and that was it. We were in love. So we do. It's 7 years old.
8 this year.
8 this year, yeah. So we're supported by Incredible Edibles, and they were our clients and helped plan the space that they wanted. And we have a grassed area, and everyone brings food to share. So food and herbal teas from the garden, an annual open day sort of keeps people engaged. And so as well as doing the annual open day, we'll do like a forage walk. So we've got little signs to put out on the day. We can't keep them out because it's quite near the main town. So it's open to vandalism, but we do den making, we do growing planters, we've done how to mulch your garden, no dig. So we incorporate permaculture. Also, we do children's activities. So we've done a jungle theme with carding tails, willow headdresses, and African drumming and all sorts of things, just to engage everyone, and then we can talk to them about permaculture.
You sound as though you're really enjoying that one.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you for that. Let's go to Antony and Rich then to sort of give their thoughts and pick up that question about engagement, shall we? Have we lost Antony?
Sorry, yes, I was just trying to get myself unmuted and stop my video instead. Well, my thought on that is we interestingly came out with a vision that was about a place of peace and abundance, and to create that in the first place so that then it will draw people in. And I think that from where we are, we need to complete the process of planting. And in my head, we haven't talked about this yet, Richard, but I think next year, once we have a completed planting, we should then have a launch to all the other allotment holders for a start. And possibly next year, we will have enough of a harvest to have a harvest festival on site. So that's how we'll begin. And I suspect that educational opportunities will come out of that. But first, I think we need to have something to show.
Anything to add, Richard?
No, I think that's. I've written something else in the chat box, so I think we've given a reasonably full answer.
We can't hear you very well. Okay, all right. Yeah, so Paula has kindly shared a positive example of community gardens engagement is hashtag more than viable, I beg your pardon, more than viable, Dr. Stephen Pritchard. And Hannah's added a point about good communication. We are over time, but only just. We want to honour your time boundary and our desire to clap for our key workers and carers and so on. It was a little rushed, so forgive us for that, but there was quite a bit to get through. Hopefully it was useful. As always, there's such richness in the group of attendees, so thank you so much for all of that. I'll hand to you, Hannah, just to close off to say, what happens next? Should I do that?
I don't mind. Yeah, if you want. Okay. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and we have been recording this. We'll make it available on our website. We're making a dedicated page with all the recordings and slides so it can be a resource for everyone to use in the future. As Paul mentioned at the beginning, National Forest Garden Scheme is a members organisation. We are here to support and advocate forest gardens, forest gardening techniques, forest gardeners, and try to make more forest gardens happen. If you're interested in what we do, follow us on social media, have a look on our website. You can also become a member for a small donation and shape the future of our organisation. Yeah, we have a Lumio forum where all our members discuss what we're going to do. This is an 8-week series, so we still have 2 more. Rakesh is going to do a great, amazing webinar on ground cover next week. So it is sold out, but there'll again be a recording, and if you want to access that or anything, just send me an email. But we'll also get that on our website afterwards. And then finally, Paul will be leading on one about advocating for forest gardens at the very end, which is the very last one on the 4th of June. So yeah, really, really excited about what's going to happen. And as well, if you do feel that you would like to support what we're doing, and we will also send around a donate button with the recordings and a feedback form. So feel free to give us any feedback. And also, if you want to donate to support what we're doing, then that's great. But yeah, thanks again for coming, taking the time, and I hope you have a nice Thursday evening. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.